Hello and welcome to IR Thinker, where we explore the world of international relations, one critical issue at a time. I'm Martin Zubko. In this episode, we'll examine how the EU uses its political, economic, and institutional resources to influence global affairs, often without resorting to direct confrontation. In particular, we'll focus on soft balancing governance model and its implications. My guest today is Professor Anders Wivel. Hello.
Hello, and thank you for having me here.
Anders Wivel is a professor of international relations at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, and recently Professor Wivel published an article in International Affairs, the EU's soft balancing governance model, origins, characteristics, and prospects for the future. So we will have the latest research insights directly from the professor. And let's start with the first question. And I would like to elaborate on basics. So how would you define soft balancing in international relations? And how does it differ from hard balancing?
Often in international relations, and indeed most often in international relations, when we talk about balancing, we mean hard balancing. We mean balancing of military assets, or more generally of material capabilities. When we speak of soft balancing, it's not something we can measure in the same sense as we can measure military capabilities or the size of an economy. Soft balancing is about diplomatic and institutional measures for balancing other states. And by balancing here, we basically mean denying other states to do what they want to do. So we are restraining other states, you might say, by institutional and diplomatic means. That's basics of soft balancing. And most often, soft balancing until now, soft balancing has been seen as a state strategy. Like we often see hard balancing, states balance each other. And what I try to do in my article on the European Union is to say that in the European Union, it has developed from being state strategies in the beginning, mainly a French soft balancing strategy combined with a US soft balancing strategy in Europe, and into a governance system. It's a system of rule. It's a system which has some rules. It has also some consequences if we break this rule, but it's basically also a system that creates expectations for what will happen in the future. So it's more than a state strategy. It's also a way we do politics in Europe.
Maybe some students may ask, what's the difference between soft power and soft balancing? Mm-hmm. Is it possible to explain?
Yeah, I think that's a good question also, because the two concepts sometimes get mixed up. And by soft power, we usually mean the power of attraction. So if we think of US soft power, which has been the main example of soft power, we think of, for instance, Hollywood movies, a certain way of life, opportunities in how you can pursue your dreams. That's a certain model of society and a certain way of being a human being in society that many people dream of. And the US has been kind of this way that many people, this place that many people have looked to for this. So that's US soft power, that we think of this country as something attractive, of something that we would like to emulate, really, because of how it is, or at least how it has been. So that's the power of attraction. But soft balancing is something different in its basic sense, that it's something that you do. You seek to balance others by diplomatic and institutional means. And then in the way I try to explain it in terms of EU policy, as a system that creates certain expectations in international relations, or at least part of international relations here in relation to the EU.
And what makes that concept of soft balancing relevant for understanding the EU today in present time? Because I think we live in sort of very dynamic geopolitical constellation, and we have like hard power, we have sanctions, then we have soft power, and now we're speaking about the soft balancing.
I think basically that soft balancing is how we do politics in the European Union. In the European Union, we have a set of rules governing the relations between member states. We also have some practices, some expectations created both by the rules, that would be sanctions if you break the rules, but also by past behavior. How have we reacted in regard to each other and in regard to the rules? So, for instance, in the EU, there's a strong practice, a strong expectations that we will seek to agree on issues rather than to have votes or conflict. So we will negotiate and negotiate and negotiate. And sometimes this is a criticism, and a valid criticism, of how we do politics in the EU. But it also has certain benefits in that it is inclusive of states, and also that it respects that the member states are different. So in that sense, I think it's not only relevant, I think it's vital. If we are to understand the EU, we need to understand how these states soft balance, and also how we created a system of institutions that balance each other. So the European Commission can only do so much, the European Parliament can only do so much, and the head of states and government can only do so much. They kind of balance out each other's in many instances.
I'm glad you mentioned institutions, because the next question is about the difference between inclusive and exclusive institutional soft balancing. And perhaps you might mention a little bit, how do you understand institution in this context? Because I think that's quite relevant as well.
In terms of understanding the EU as a soft balancing governance system, I think there are at least two ways that we understand institutions, and one is the, you might say, very fundamental formal ways of understanding an institution. An institution has written down rules. It has written down who can be members of this institutions. It has written down various measures to take if members do not follow the rules. And then there's you might say a broader or more informal understanding of institutions, institutions as embedded or fundamental practices. So we think of our IR theories, we might say that this resembles the difference between primary and secondary institutions, for instance, in the English school. There are some fundamental practices that lays to the ground of EU cooperation. And then on these fundamental practices, understandings, concepts, we build the formal institutions. And in the EU, understanding of what is important is both the states, but also the bindings of these states through institutions. And in that, we also have a distinction between the inclusive and exclusive soft balancing. Inclusive soft balancing, we would say, is the binding of other states by institutions. So we include other states in our institutions, and by doing this, we make them commit to our rules and practices, and that allows us to restrain their actions, and we accept that our actions are restrained as well. So that creates a certain set of sanctions, rules, but also of expectations. When we think not of inclusive but exclusive soft balancing, which has until now also been the primary way we have thought about soft balancing, we think of excluding other states. We think of using diplomacy and institutions to restrain states outside our community, outside our institutions, whether they're formal or informal. So the probably most prominent example of exclusive soft balancing is the soft balancing by France and Germany of the United States, or at least the attempts to soft balance the United States in the lead up to the Iraq war. So they thought they sought to set up diplomatic and institutional measures to restrain the United States not to invade Iraq until the weapons inspectors in Iraq in 2003 had much more time to see if Iraq was really producing weapons of mass destruction.
And is it possible to perhaps theoretically evaluate which approach is more prominent within the EU structures? Is there more emphasis on exclusive or inclusive? Because I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah. I think the main mechanism for soft balancing in the EU is the inclusive balancing, and that's also where the EU has been most successful, and where they have been most influential and most successful in doing this. Has been in the enlargement processes of the EU, gradually integrating new states into the EU, making them commit to comply with the rules and practices of the EU, then thereby slowly binding these states through a long process, actually, and a long evaluation process of prospective member states until they could become members. So gradually, the EU has expanded its size and therefore also expanded its ability for inclusive soft balancing. I think also by doing this, actually, the EU has expanded its ability to do exclusive soft balancing in the sense that the EU has become such a strong market power that it has the ability better than before to do this. And we might have a test case on our hands before too long if we are going to see an international system which is more characterized by trade wars than it has been in the past. Then the EU will be able to throw around its market power in exclusive soft balancing.
Is it possible to name some historical milestones or some important events that shaped the EU's soft balancing approach? For instance, we have Treaty of Rome that played significant part in this concept.
I think so. I think that if we look at the early beginnings of the European integration process, I think the early actions of both France and the United States in seeking to, for France, it was attempts to strategically soft balance West Germany, and for the United States to strategically soft balance the Soviet Union, and in doing so, these two states in particular, and followed by other European states also, they had an interest also in gradually institutionalizing relations between states. So it started out as what we would see as conventional strategic soft balancing, states having an intention to soft balance other states. What this led to in the early EU integration process was in 1957, of course, the Treaty of Rome, which was one important milestone. It also built on the European coal and steel community, and what the Treaty of Rome did, building on this, was basically to take out, you might say, the hard balancing dynamics also of European politics, and they could do that also because there was a strong interest from the US, and the US helped doing that by providing a security guarantee for Europe, but also in doing so, they created institutions that further on would create important expectations from European states on how they would behave in relation to each other. And the most important expectations was that we would not go to war against each other. And one reason why we would not go to war against each other was, in addition to the US security guarantee, that kind of the war-making capability was taken out of the hands of individual states by seeking to create common institutional measures for this. So the Treaty of Rome was very important for doing this, and also in particular for reintegrating West Germany into Europe as a political and economic actor. And that laid the ground for what we saw later on, the development of, might say, a mini great power concert or a European cooperative hegemony between Germany and France, Germany having the economic power and France having the political power and legitimacy to be kind of the engines of the EU development. So I would say that's an important milestone. And a second important milestone would be the Treaty on the European Union. The Treaty on the European Union followed up in 1992 on the Single European Act from 1986. The Single European Act was very much about European competitiveness, about Europe lagging behind Japan, East Asia, the United States on competitiveness. The European Union kind of created, you might say, the superstructure or the political instruments to follow up on this. And it did so, also by creating the Economic and Monetary Union. And the Economic Monetary Union was in many ways, it was it was parallel to what happened in the Treaty of Rome, in the sense that it was the attempt by France, Italy, and others to create institutional measures to restrain Germany, to soft balance Germany in a way that it could be integrated into European politics, because the reunification of Germany after the Cold War created such a strong actor in the middle of Europe. So we might say that these two milestones are also the two successful reintegrations of Germany.
Do we know any failures or maybe unsuccessful, I can't say milestones, but let's say occasions or events that we should remember and maybe we should learn something from them?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we do. I think if we look at the way soft balancing works in Europe, in the European Union, it's very easy to restrain states when they are in the application process before they come full members. One weakness of the soft balancing governance system is that it's difficult to set sanctions once you're inside. We do not throw states out of the European Union. That's actually part of the system which is important for it to work, because it's a decentralized system. It's a system that allows for pluralism. It's inclusive. If we started throwing states out of the EU, it might be soon kind of fall apart. But if we can't throw out states, so that's a bit of a tension or dilemma, it also creates the opportunities for states not to comply within the European Union. And I think we can think of examples. I think some of the more recent examples are from Poland, and even more recently from Hungary, which has had a different perspective on what the EU should do, and Hungary in particular also in relation to the war in Ukraine. We have, you might say, the system has worked. It has been successful in a way that the EU has been able to do politics, to have common positions, but has also been less successful in the terms of It has taken a long time to find these common positions, and they have also perhaps been a little bit more watered down than other states would have liked them to be. But that's how an inclusive soft balancing system works. You might think, what is the alternative? The alternative would be that you had a more centralized system, but then it would only be a small core of European states, and they would have much less influence and power.
A very important element, I think, in this balancing approach is the question of national sovereignty. How does the EU balance national sovereignty with collective decision making in that government model? Because we know that this is a question that goes since the beginning of the EU, like national and supranational levels of decision making processes. So when we add that sort of like matrix of balancing, how does it work? How do you see the progress and maybe some of your observations based on your research?
I think that one important element in seeing the EU as a soft balancing governance system is to accept that there will always be a tension between the national sovereignty and between being able to make decisions, to have the effectiveness of the decision making, and the able to make, in particular, decisions in a fast manner. The EU is infamously slow in making decisions, and but at the same time, this is also because it secures the inclusivity of the states. That states and the pluralism of European politics, that the states can have different opinions, and we need in a negotiation process and in a debate to hear these different opinions, to listen, to modify our own opinions, to slowly work against common solutions. So I think it would be a mistake to say that sovereignty was some kind of hindrance or break on the EU as a soft balancing governance system. I would say quite the opposite. Sovereignty is one of the core elements of the EU as a soft balancing system, because the states balance each other and they use the institutions also to do that. And we have institutions that take care of the common interest, like the European Commission, but we have also institutions representing the states, as when the heads of states and government meet. And it is in this process and this balancing between states, institutions, between different states, between different institutions, that we find the solutions and that we do politics in Europe. And I think we should sometimes we forget to look at the EU and see what a success this has actually been and continues to be. Even though we face crisis after crisis, we still have this ability to make decisions, to move forward, to cooperate, even though we have different opinions, to have a system that basically works in terms of creating a shared market, of having some shared norms of liberal democracy also that we adhere to.
Do you think that the European Union needs some special institution, or do you think that the European Union has too many institutions when you research the soft balancing? Because that's one of the questions I'm receiving from students, that sometimes they think it's either too many of those institutions, or there is one institution missing that might be important in particular decision-making processes. So based on your research, what's your stance on that?
I understand the question, because the EU is crazy complex in terms of its institutional structure, and at the same time, you might point out, if you focus on a particular issue area, you might think, well, they missed something there. So I definitely think it's a good question. I think when we look at the EU and the institutions in the EU, I think we should approach it from different perspectives. I think one perspective is in terms of decision-making efficiency. We need to have institutions which will eventually lead us to make some decisions, right? There may need to be some efficiency in the institutions. We should also think of it as a question of legitimacy. There need to be at least, I think, two types of legitimacy. One is the legitimacy in relation to Europe, to our shared interests, our shared values, and the other one is the legitimacy in relation to our differences, to how we look different upon Europe and also on the world seen from our national perspectives. And I think basically the EU is doing a good job in this. We have these balances. It takes a lot of time. It costs some money, although not as much as the state administrations, not far from as much as the state administrations. Sometimes from the outside, there's the question of what is the phone number if we want to call the EU, and I think there are many phone numbers there that you might want to call, and I think that's also as the current crisis shows that there might be different opinions there. But I think we should look at it both from these two types of legitimacy and in terms of efficiency, and accept that the tension is in there, and accept that it is actually this tension that makes the system work.
Sometimes we also forget about institutions that the EU has. And that's something I think I would like to underline, because for the future and for the decision-making processes, that's very important that the EU has more institutions. And sometimes we only know 3, 4, but there are also controlling mechanisms. There are some research institutions that bringing like really good papers to think about the EU in or from many perspectives. So I think that's quite a diversity we have that we sometimes forget about. The next question, because you mentioned efficiency of institutions, and I think the next concept might be how those institutions adapt to changes, and that's the concept of plasticity. How would you take this element to soft balancing?
In my article on the EU as a soft balancing governance model, I write that if we are to understand this soft balance governance model, we need to zoom in on two aspects of the EU, and one is the nature of the EU. And the nature of the EU, we conceptualize by talking about normative power Europe and market power Europe. And then there's the form of the EU. And the form of the EU, I argue, is best described or conceptualized as plasticity. And plasticity is a concept that we get from biology. Some forms of life have plasticity. And it is basically the ability to adapt. They can adapt themselves to the environment. And I argue that the EU is characterized, this governance, soft balancing governance system is characterized by plasticity. And that plasticity has two aspects. One is the ability to adapt to the outside world, outside the EU, you might say upwards towards the international system, the international order. And the other one is the ability to adapt downwards, that is to adapt to the shifting interests of the member states and also to the expanding number of member states. So the EU is characterized by this, you might say, dual plasticity, adapting to the international order and adapting to the European political space and the member states of this European political space. And I think if we look at the EU as any other institution, this is a difficult process. It's far from perfect, but there are some mechanisms in the EU system for doing this. And one central mechanism in the EU system is the enlargement processes. For instance, they allowed the EU to adapt to the end of the Cold War. And they are the treaty revision processes, and they have allowed the EU to adapt to a rising number of member states, to allow for this in how to make decisions in a way that would allow the EU to be fairly effective going forward. I think when it comes to adapting to the international order, I think there are various aspects of this. I think when it comes to adapting to the international political economic order, I think what we should look to are very much the EU institutions. I think the role they play in creating a global economic order, a global trade order, but also a global trade order that actually uses the mechanisms of inclusive institutional balancing through trade agreements. So like we have the enlargement with other European states, we also have the trade agreements with states outside Europe. And there, of course, important element of trade agreements is obviously economic, but we've seen the EU increasingly also put, you might say, aspects of normative power Europe in these trade agreements. It's about labor rights, about also more basic respecting more basic human rights. So that's the economic political order, and then we have the international security order, and that's a little bit more tricky seen from an EU perspective for several reasons. One reason is that in the EU we have some of the strongest military powers in not only in Europe but also in the world, and we have some states that are much weaker. So there are big power differentials within the EU. And the other aspect is that hard security is where we have the lowest degree of institutionalization when it comes to the EU. It's basically something that the states do and need to agree upon. So there we've seen often that we have had the bigger member states, the stronger military powers, which have sought to take the lead on some of these issues. But we've also seen splits within the EU and splits often between what some have called the Europeanists and some have called the more kind of Atlanticist states. So these have also been splits in regard to the United States and the role of the United States as a security provider in Europe. That said, you might say, how have we handled these splits? And I would argue we've handled them basically by soft balancing, right? We have handled them by diplomatic declarations, by the use of institutions. And in that sense, we should also think of how are these challenges handled in our other places in the world? How were these challenges handled in European history? They were handled by resorting to arms. They're handled by war, and they're not in Europe today. And I think that testifies also to the importance of soft balancing rather than hard balancing and war.
How is soft balancing received outside of the European Union? I'm thinking about non-member states. Do we have any examples of successful or maybe less successful cases that we should mention?
Yeah, I think while the EU has been very successful at inclusive soft balancing, it has been less successful on exclusive soft balancing. I think if we look at the for instance, as one of the primary examples that began the whole debate on soft balancing was really the Iraq War and the attempt of Germany and France and others to soft balance the United States. And in one sense, the soft balancing system worked inside Europe, that there were differences within Europe, but we resolved these differences or agreed to disagree to some sense. But later on, as the war moved on, European states were actually cooperating again and cooperating with the US. On the other hand, I mean, it was not successful in stopping the U.S. from invading Iraq, right? It was not successful in moving the date of the invasion far into the future and allowing the weapons inspectors to get more time. So it showed also that it could only do so much. It could highlight that these European states disagreed with the United States, but it also highlighted that some other European states actually agreed with the United States. So I would say that shows the soft balancing worked inside Europe, but also that it didn't really have a big effect on what the US did. I think also, if we look at EU soft balancing against Russia, it seems not to have been very effective. It has not restrained Russia in its actions towards Ukraine. So there are also you might see there are some challenges for the EU. So the exclusive soft balancing of the EU has not been as successful as the inclusive soft balancing of the EU.
Are there any key or fundamental points that we should mention why the external balancing power of the European Union is less successful? Is it because the EU is not federation, so there is no like one Minister of Foreign Affairs, or is it because of the unity, which is sometimes very difficult to achieve? Or do we have some elements that, it's good to mention that we better understand why that external matters and why maybe we should focus a bit more on that?
Yeah, I think one reason is that the EU has tried to use soft balancing here in particular events which had a strong military character. And the EU did really not have much power in this regard. So you might say that they have used soft balancing where you would need also some hard balancing really to achieve success. I think that's one reason. I think another reason is that, and I think that goes to kind of the EU as a soft balancing governance model, as I argue in the article. I think one reason why I speak of embedded inclusive soft balancing and why I see this as a governance model is that it's a way of doing politics where you both have, you might say, the formal rules and sanctions, but you also have, through the continued actions between these states, interactions, day-to-day diplomacy, you also create certain expectations, not only of what the others will do, but actually also of what you yourself will do as representing a state towards other states. And when you do exclusive soft balancing, it's not a governance system. It's more like a strategic action towards these particular actors or states. So I think the EU, you might say, has been more effective and successful when it comes to inclusive than to exclusive soft balancing, but it also shows that the EU has been more successful as a soft balancing governance model than it has been when it has attempted at strategic soft balancing. And one reason for this is also that we have this decentralized system. So as you also I think indicated in your question, the EU has difficulty in being a strategic actor in international affairs. And of course, I think this will be a challenge and a potential weakness if we see the international order, as might happen now, transforming into an order which is more characterized by great power conflict and by great powers acting strategically towards each other, also in military affairs.
There is one question which I think some people might ask, and that's sanctions. We have so many articles about sanctions.
Yeah.
So are sanctions a part of soft balancing, or sanctions we should maybe think of as a hard balancing power?
Mm-hmm. I think that that sanctions might point towards further developing the balancing model in perhaps looking at it as continuum from soft to hard balancing, and when we do sanctions, we kind of move from the very institutional diplomatic measures toward using material power also, not hard military material power, but still material power. So I would say that sanctions are perhaps somewhere in the middle between the soft and the hard balancing. That said, if we should make kind of a more dichotomous way of looking at soft balancing and hard balancing, and say that it's not a continuum, it's either or, then I would put sanctions in the soft balancing category, because it's not resorting to military means.
And I would just add one more layer. What about if we have some sort of resolution or some document accepted by, for instance, European Parliament? Is this part of the soft balancing or not? Because sometimes we have sort of resolution, for instance, like in the past, we know that European Parliament accepted that Russia is a terrorist state, mm-hmm. or state sponsoring terrorism. Mm-hmm. So this might be also the message to Russia. But from the soft balancing point of view, how should we understand it?
Mm-hmm. So there, if we have say we have only two categories, it's either soft or hard, then I would still put it in the soft category. Also because it's signaling, it's also a shaming of Russia. There's not really a military backup of this statement. So I would put that in the soft balancing category. And you might say it might be actually less effective because it's seeking to counter military action by Russia by these declarations.
Right. Let's go to different field, and that's the international relations theory. Uh-huh. Because I think many people might be interested in what is the ground for soft balancing. Are you taking your ideas, inspiration, thoughts from particular strand of international relations theory, or is it something that is based on completely different foundation?
Mm-hmm. There's a debate on soft balancing, and is soft balancing a part of realism in terms that it is balancing, or is it an alternative to realism in terms of saying realism is about material power, about material balancing, and this is about something else, showing that material balancing is perhaps not always that important. My point of departure is in what I call realist institutionalism, or rather it is Samuel Barkin and Patricia Weitzman who call it realist institutionalism in their work. Barkin and Weitzman, they take their point of departure in classical realism, saying we have this, we start from realist premises, we might say. We start from acknowledging that we have an international anarchic system, that this international anarchic system has implications for the logics of international relations, but that it does not necessarily lead the states to seek particular tools for taking care of their security and interests. And I argue that in many cases, the most effective tools for states, if you want to kind of pursue your national interest, that you might do that more effectively by institutional and diplomatic means. It's also more cost effective than by military means. So it's not the kind of realism that we might find with some structural realists or neo-realists like John Mersheimer or others, but it's based on a more, I would say, a broader classical realist understanding of international relations. And then you might say, when will states then use these soft tools rather than the harder tools? And there I point to also in the article that when we look at Europe, we see some of the characteristics that we see also in other parts of the international system developing during the 20th century, in particular since the end of World War II. That is interdependence. That is a shared understanding that the international realm is also a realm where there are certain rules and practices, that we have the global spread of particular ideas. When we look at Europe, we see kind of an extreme example of this. Europe is an extreme case in the wider international system, and therefore these soft tools apply more to Europe than they might do outside Europe. That said, I think also if we look at a lot of the work on East Asia by Kai He and others, this is also work on institutional soft balancing that I partly take my inspiration from in the article. What I argue is different between East Asia and Europe is that in Europe, soft balancing has developed from being strategic soft balancing by particular states into being a soft balancing governance model, which is a particular way of doing politics, because we have certain expectations and practices of how others should behave and will behave, but others also of how we should behave and what we will do in the future.
As each concept in international relations, there is always a little bit of criticism, or maybe you face some challenges. So let's mention those ones. So we have that balanced view of the soft balancing.
I think one criticism against soft balancing is that it's difficult to kind of conceptually contain or pin down. One criticism right from the beginning of the soft balancing debate has been to say, isn't this just what we call diplomacy or diplomatic friction? The everyday interactions of states in international relations, does it really add anything to call it soft balancing? And I think it does add something. And I think it adds, when we look at the strategic soft balancing, I think it acts similar to what hard balancing adds, in the sense of it allows us to conceptualize a particular tool of state action in international anarchy. I think also looking at the EU, and we might see that also develop in other international institutions, I think also it allows us to understand the decentralized nature of governance in the EU. And I think this is very important because it also allows us to give policy advice on the EU and policy advice on the development of the European political space. It allows us to see some of the characteristics, for instance, that we might lose if the EU becomes a more centralized geopolitical actor. There might be strong reasons for creating a more centralized geopolitical actor, but we should be aware of the costs if we choose to go down that avenue.
So there is a correlation between the European Union autonomy and the soft balancing approach, because more centralized is the EU, less space for soft balancing, because decision making is made in one sort of point or central level.
Yeah.
So that's how it works when we add that element.
Exactly. So and that will also means that there will be less space for pluralism. It might create strains. There might be some strains, of course, with if we look at a country like Hungary, or maybe a country like maybe other countries, but it might also create strains in regard to, for instance, Malta or Ireland on creating non-alliance policies, neutral policies. If you're part of a geopolitical, highly centralized actor, there will also be conflict between some of the big member states and some of the smaller member states who should make these vital decisions. So there's a lot of what makes the EU work today and move forward that will be lost in that process, and it will create I think, a very different European actor.
Right. And if we lose this internally, how will the external soft balancing be? Because I think that's quite interesting theoretical question. As we said, that we have more centralized EU, but how would this influence the external soft balancing?
I think that that will depend also on the character of the nature of this more centralized EU. Because if we look at the EU today, it has market power and has to some extent also normative power, not least when backed up with the market power, as we've seen in the trade agreements. I think if you have a geopolitical centralized actor, you also need, if soft balancing is to work, I think you also need military capabilities. And then we're moving towards a more state-like European entity. I think that is very unlikely. I think also that ultimately it's not likely that it would be successful.
Do we know any regions in the world that should learn from this soft balancing approach of the European Union?
Yes, I think so, and I think what we see now is of course a world of more great power rivalry, but I think at the same time what we see is also a more regionalized world. So we see a strengthening of regional politics, and when we see that, we also see a demand for solutions on how to politically construct and reconstruct regions. And there, I think elements from the European experience could be valuable, both for East Asia, facing some of the same challenges as Europe. We have a strong Russia, they have a strong China. Many of them are dependent also on U.S. military backup as we are. So there's definitely something to learn. It might also be some lessons to learn for South America if they manage to strengthen their cooperation. So I think in a more regionalized world, there is a demand for ideas on how to do that. And I think at least some of the ideas in Europe and the basic mechanism, I think is valuable in many regions, because it accepts as its point of departure the difference between the states, a certain degree of autonomy between the states, that we have shared values and shared interests, but also that we have some values and interests that we do not share. And even if we do not share them, we should cooperate, because it's better than to be in conflict. And I think the EU is a very good example of this.
Right. The last question for today's interview, Professor Wivel. We were speaking about states within the European Union and other states outside of the European Union. What about non-state actors and self-balancing approach? How should we understand it?
I think that in the EU, I think it's when it comes to the inclusive soft balancing, that's difficult, because the EU is an organization of states, and even though we have strong institutions within the EU, they are not what we usually would understand as non-state actors. I think when we look outside the EU and how we relate to non-state actors, I think that there's some aspects of the soft balancing that are viable. I think for one, I think increasingly important type of non-state actors that are kind of what we sometimes call the tech giants. I think the EU has taken measures which are basically soft balancing measures, both in trying to include these in the rules, but also of threat of exclusion if they do not follow these rules. I think there might be strong grounds for looking more into this, as there would be strong grounds for looking more into also the EU relations with aid agencies. I think is an interesting case. And I think also the EU relationship with global international institutions, UN agencies, the World Trade Organization, and so on, would also be interesting to look into. So I think we need to know more about this, but I think definitely there's the potential for the EU also there to make an impact.
Professor Wivel, many thanks for your insightful thoughts and remarks based on your research and the latest article. I think it's a very interesting topic, and I think this is the time to differentiate between soft power and soft balancing. And I think if we better understand that difference, I think we might be better in implementing it in the practical life. Because policymakers, politicians, and they might struggle with this distinction. So I think that's very good that you published the article. I'm happy that we could explain many things about self-balancing. And I want to say again, thank you very much for being on IO Think.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.